In 1943, while millions bowed to Hitler's tyranny, a small group of students dared to say no. Armed not with weapons but with words, they risked everything to expose the truth. But in Nazi Germany, defiance came at a cost, one paid in blood. This is the story of the White Rose, the young heroes who defied a dictator and paid the ultimate price. Who were these brave students? How did they challenge one of the most oppressive regimes in history? And why did their defiance end in brutal crackdown, sham trials, and execution by guillotine? Let's dive into their story. The White Rose was a small group of students from the University of Munich. They were young, idealistic, and deeply troubled by what they saw in Nazi Germany. Sophie Scholl, her brother Hans Scholl, and their friend Christoph Probst were the core members. They came from ordinary families, yet their courage was anything but ordinary. Sophie was born into a Christian family in 1921. She was only 12 when Hitler and his National Socialist Party came to power. Like her schoolmates and siblings, she eagerly participated in Nazi-run youth programs, the Hitler Youth for Boys and the League of German Girls for Girls, even though her parents were critical of the Nazi Party. With her enthusiasm and natural leadership, Sophie quickly rose through the ranks. By the time she graduated from high school, Germany was at war. Two of her brothers and her boyfriend had been drafted to fight. The cheerful patriotism of her youth was replaced with heartache for the young people dying on the front, fear for her family and friends, and contempt for the fascist police state that controlled every aspect of their lives. Intelligent and ambitious, Sophie aspired to study biology and philosophy at university, but was forced to work for a year in the National Labor Service. There, she gritted against the military regimen and the mind-numbing chores. In her diary entries and letters to her boyfriend, we glimpse a young woman who hungered for peace and freedom. Unable to contain their anger at Hitler's criminal regime, Hans and a small circle of like-minded friends formed the White Rose in June 1942. They began publishing and distributing underground leaflets, calling on ordinary Germans to stand up against Nazism. Hans and Alexander Schomerel described the mass murder of Polish Jews in German concentration camps as the most terrible crime against human dignity. In their attempt to halt the war effort, they advocated for the sabotage of the armaments industry. "We will not be silent," they wrote to their fellow students. "We are your bad conscience. The White Rose will not leave you in peace." Knowing that only military force could end Nazi domination, they limited their aims to achieve a renewal from within the severely wounded German spirit. They composed leaflets revealing the Nazi regime's crimes and urging people to resist. Printing and distributing these leaflets was incredibly dangerous. Working in secret, they used a hand-cranked duplicator, mailed leaflets to random addresses, and left them in public places like phone booths and park benches. Every time they handed out a leaflet, they risked their lives. The White Rose urged regular Germans to commit secret acts of sabotage wherever they labored, in munitions factories, government offices, newspapers, and universities. Every one of us is capable of contributing something to bringing down this system. Sophie joined her brother in the White Rose resistance, helping to publish and distribute the leaflets around Munich and other German cities. The task was not easy, given wartime rationing and travel restrictions. "Please duplicate and pass on," the third leaflet implored, with the hope that it would reach more Germans opposed to the regime. It didn't take long for the Gestapo, the Nazi secret police, to notice the leaflets. They were determined to find and stop the perpetrators. On the 18th of February, Hans and Sophie Scholl embarked on their most daring expedition yet. They planned to distribute copies of their sixth and, as it would turn out, final leaflet at the University of Munich, where students would find them as they exited lectures. The siblings left piles of leaflets around the central stairwell. As they reached the top, Sophie still had several leaflets left, so she threw them over the balcony to float down to the students below. A caretaker saw her and immediately called the Gestapo. Hans Scholl, clutching a draft of another leaflet in his pocket, attempted to swallow it, but the Gestapo were too quick. They interrogated the siblings for days, trying to force them to name others in the group. Yet Sophie and Hans refused to betray their friends. Even under intense pressure, they remained steadfast. The rest of the White Rose group panicked. Alexander Schomerel rushed to Lilo Forst Ramdor's flat, where she helped him secure new clothes and a fake passport. Schomerel attempted to flee to Switzerland, but was forced back by heavy snow. Returning to Munich, he was captured after a former girlfriend recognized him entering an air raid shelter during a bombing raid. He was arrested and later executed. Sophie and Hans tried to protect the other conspirators by claiming that they alone were responsible for writing the leaflets. However, their friends were ultimately drawn into the investigation and suffered a cruel fate, death by guillotine. Just 4 days after their arrest, Sophie, Hans, and Christoph were put on trial. But this was no ordinary court. It was the People's Court run by Judge Roland Freisler, a man notorious for his cruelty and loyalty to Hitler. The trial was a sham. There was no real defense, no chance for a fair verdict. Judge Freisler screamed at the defendants, calling them traitors. He didn't let them speak, except to mock them. In the end, he sentenced all three to death. Sophie, Hans, and Christoph were led out of the courtroom, knowing they would never see their families again. The second White Rose trial took place on the 19th of April 1943. Among those on trial were Hans Herzl, Suzanne Herzl, Franz Josef Müller, Heinrich Guter, Eugen Grimminger, Otto Acher, Theodor Haker, Willy Graf, Annelies Graf, Heinrich Bollinger, Helmut Bauer, and Frank Harnack. At the last minute, the prosecutor added Trot La France, Gisela Schürtling, and Katharina Schudekop. Willy Graf, Kurt Huber, and Alexander Schomerel were sentenced to death. Willy Graf was kept in solitary confinement for about 7 months. During that time, he was tortured in an attempt to make him name other members of the White Rose. He never gave up a name, even when the Gestapo threatened to capture his family. He was executed on the 12th of October 1943. On the 29th of January 1945, Hans Conrad Liepelt was executed, expelled from Hamburg University in 1940 due to his Jewish ancestry. He and his girlfriend, Marie-Louise Jahn, copied and distributed the White Rose pamphlets under a new title, and their spirit lives on. If you're inspired by stories of courage and resistance, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss our upcoming videos. After the executions of Sophie Scholl, Hans Scholl, and Christoph Probst, the Nazis weren't finished. More members of the White Rose were put on trial, but this time, things did not go as planned. The third White Rose trial was set for the 20th of April 1943, Hitler's birthday. Judge Roland Freisler, the same man who sentenced Sophie and Hans, was ready to deliver even harsher punishments. 4 people were on trial: Wilhelm Geyer, Harold Dorn, Josef Songren, and Manfred Eichenmeier. Freisler planned to sentence them to death, but he didn't want to issue too many death sentences at once. So he delayed their verdicts until the next day. Then something unexpected happened. The evidence against the 4 defendants went missing. Without it, the trial couldn't proceed. The case was postponed, and the trial didn't actually occur until the 13th of July 1943, months later. During that trial, another twist emerged. Gisela Schürtling, a former member of the White Rose, had betrayed her friends by giving names to the Gestapo. But in court, she changed her mind. She retracted her testimony and refused to accuse the defendants, a huge blow to the prosecution. Judge Freisler was absent for this trial. A different judge took charge, and without strong evidence, he had no choice but to acquit Wilhelm Geyer, Harold Dorn, and Manfred Eichenmeier. Only Josef Songren was found guilty, receiving a surprisingly light sentence of 6 months in prison for Nazi Germany. One of the most dramatic stories from this time is that of Trauta La France. She was acquitted on the 19th of April 1943, but the Nazis weren't finished with her. They arrested her again, and she spent the rest of the war in prison. Her trial was continuously delayed because of Allied air raids. Finally, it was set for April 1945. Had it taken place, she would likely have been executed. But just 3 days before the trial, Allied forces liberated the town where she was held. Trauta was free. The bombs that delayed her trial ultimately saved her life. When Sophie, Hans, and Christoph were executed by guillotine on the 22nd of February 1943, their deaths were swift, but their courage remains unforgettable. Sophie's last words were, "The sun still shines." Even in the face of death, they clung to hope. Though the White Rose was silent, their message lived on. Copies of their leaflets were smuggled out of Germany and dropped by Allied planes. Their story spread, inspiring countless others to resist. Today, they are remembered as heroes who stood up for what was right, even when it cost them everything. In a world where tyranny still exists, their story reminds us that even the smallest acts of defiance can make a difference. Thanks for watching. Take a second to like, subscribe, and share to keep more stories like this alive.